All right. Welcome back, everybody. We have another great guest for our professional interview series. Today we have Dr. Lowell Caneday, uh, mostly from Oklahoma State University, but we'll talk about his career path here in a second. How you doing, Dr. Caneday?
Doing very well. Good to see you.
You as well. Uh, I guess to start off, and I feel like with all of these I've done, I get to know a little bit more about people that I thought I knew pretty well. I'm sure it's going to be the same with you, but um, I think it's going to be interesting to talk about your career path, and now that you're not retired, your wife says you still work full time, so uh,
Officially retired, getting probably a D plus, C minus. Yes.
yeah. Uh, well, so and you've had a longer career path than some of the other folks I've had on here, but I guess why don't we start off? We'll kind of go in the way back machine, I guess, and tell us where you grew up and what you did growing up for fun.
Well, I was born and raised in a little town, Taylor's Falls, Minnesota. Taylor's Falls is on the eastern side of the state, right adjacent to the St. Croix River. So from our yard, St. Croix River, which was one of the original 7 national wild and scenic rivers, um, that was our backyard. That was my play area. And immediately across the river, Wisconsin. But we grew up on a farm, and you think mid-century, mid 1900s in Minnesota. Uh, Kids today really don't think in terms of the dramatic changes. For example, we didn't have uh, in-house running water. We had outdoor facilities. Uh, we did have electricity when I was a child and added the running water later. But the farm, everything was done really manually. Milk cows until I was probably 12 when we added a milking machine. But grew up in that environment, and a fairly large family. I have 3 brothers and a sister. The the great advantage there in Minnesota is that growing up on the St. Croix River, I greatly appreciated parks, natural areas. It just became our background for that's where we played, that's where we had our recreation as kids. Um, so early life was really heavy into manual labor. I worked in summer camps, um, would go camping quite frequently. Uh, about it would have been the summer of my sophomore year, which would have been really my first opportunity to be employed legally outside the house. Once I turned 16, um, I got a job at Interstate State Park there in Taylor's Falls. My job working for the Minnesota Department of Forestry was to spray gooseberry bushes. Gooseberry bushes are the host for white pine blister rust, and the white pines in the park were dying, but they're a dominant feature of that forest environment. So the plan was to kill the host for the rust and preserve the forest. Well, getting into the park made me realize that was going to be something I would really enjoy doing. So the following year, which would have been after my junior year in high school, I went back to the park and I began working for Minnesota State Parks. Started out as a clerk, eventually became a ranger, but worked for 6 years through my high school and then through my college years as a park ranger with Minnesota State Parks. Um, and really got into the world of parks and recreation. So that kind of is the connection that I had that opened a whole new career. At the same time, I was going to college, actually down in Texas. So I would drive from Minnesota to Texas. You obviously mistakes, long travel. You didn't go home on weekends. You didn't go home for holiday breaks. But I completed my bachelor's degree in Texas in mathematics. And then I did my master's at the University of Wyoming in parks and recreation. So my interest was continuing in the parks and recreation world.
What when you were in Texas, I guess what made you consider a school in tech, being from, basically the Minneapolis area? What made you consider moving to Texas for school, and then what made you consider mathematics as far as your first degree?
Well, I'll start with the math side. Math, I've always enjoyed math. As it happened, I ended up being valedictorian in high school. So I had some opportunities in Minnesota to go to some in-state colleges or universities. I grew up in a Christian family. My parents did not want us to go to one of the state schools. There's a private engineering school at the time, Laterno College, now Laterno University in Longview, Texas. And I had the opportunity to go there, a high quality engineering school with an excellent math program. And you think at the time, this would have been in the mid 1960s, computers were just on the market edge. And I did a lot of computer work in that math program. Now, students today don't even think in terms of what those computers would have been like. They were all card reader machines. The computers that we worked on required separate buildings with their own air conditioning systems. A single room would hold a computer with less power than what a desktop would have today. But that computer connection really was something I was interested in, and being in an engineering oriented school,
Yeah.
getting a math degree, I've never regretted it.
Yeah.
It became a tool.
Sure.
And has certainly been a part of my life ever since. So, but yes, it was quite a change to go from rural Minnesota to East Texas in the pre-civil rights years. My eyes were open to society. In fact, kind of a sidelight to the whole issue, the city of Longview, a city of 70,000 people, did not have a parks and recreation department. What they did, boys had the opportunity to play sports. Girls were expected to be cheerleaders or observers.
Yeah.
The city was divided racially. Literally, there were portions of the town that were the African American area. There are other portions that were the white area. As one of my undergraduate class projects, I had put together a proposal for the city of Longview to have a Parks and Recreation department. Unknown to me, my faculty member took that proposal to the city leadership, and the city leadership accepted the proposal. And in 1970, started a Department of Parks and Recreation and then asked me to come in and initiate the program. So in the summer of 1970, right after I had graduated, um, my I began the department there. And that fall, I left to go to the University of Wyoming. And since then, that department has grown. It's an award-winning, very strong Parks and Recreation department today. But it all started as a class project.
That's awesome. That and for folks, Longview, Texas is like northeast Texas, like
Right
what,
along.
maybe hour and a half, 2 hours east of Dallas.
Yep, right along Interstate 20. There's a number of East Texas communities. Tyler, Longview, Marshall are kind of the corridor right there in East Texas, heavily populated.
And so you're doing that, and during that time, you made the decision to go to graduate school to get a graduate degree. What made you think that that was your next step? And then again, why the University of Wyoming?
Well, so as an undergraduate at Laternal College, as I say, an engineering school, one of the big events that we had on campus, or started on campus, was a go-kart race as part of our intramural recreational sports program. And I was the student leader for the intramural recreation sports program. Did the planning, the coordinating, the developing of this opportunity for students to literally build their own go-karts. And then we would shut down the core of campus and had a Grand Prix track. Well, that made national news. And we were, another gentleman from the campus and I were invited to go to the National Intramural Recreation Sports Association National Conference to present a paper on operating a go-kart race as part of an intramural recreation sports program. So when I went to Colorado Springs to present that paper, I met a gentleman from the University of Wyoming. Charlie Fisher was the gentleman. And Charlie immediately offered me a graduate assistantship. And I'd always wanted to go to Wyoming for recreation purposes, but ended up going there to do my master's degree. So kind of an interesting connection, but we did some very creative things in the intramural recreational area. And like I say, I don't know many colleges that would try to run an on-campus go-kart race where the students build, run the race in their own machines. So,
Yeah. Times have changed, I guess, right?
times have changed. Yes. I'm not sure you could get it past an insurance company today, let alone.
Well, that's exactly what I was just thinking. I was like, well, I wonder how many no's I would get to try to do that.
That's right.
Well, so you completed your degree there in Wyoming. What was your next step after your master's degree?
So I was planning on getting married in the summer of 1971. It was also in the kind of the wind down of the Vietnam War. And I had, this takes you way back in the days of the draft, I ended up being number 15. So I lasted like one day before I got call up. That's a lottery you did not want to win. And I was clearly a winner. But due to some health reasons, I was not able to go into the military. But that postmasters, it was either you were going to go into the military or you had to have some legal rationale why you would remain outside the military. And due to health reasons. Um, I entered the job force at the time. I was actually then hired by my alma mater, Fraternal College, to become the director of student life. Um, Hired as the dean, the assistant to the dean of men at that time, and operated the housing and the campus recreation, a variety of student services. So I ended up in that role and continued in that role. I was a dean of men for my first 2 years, and I got promoted to be dean of students, and I spent another 6 years as dean of students, eventually leaving Fraternal College in the summer of 1979 when I went to Minnesota to do my doctorate. So, interesting years. Uh, got married in that summer of 71 and had 2 children by the time I was going back to do my doctorate. Moved, I married a lady from the South, Diane, moved her to Minnesota. She was not happy going to a Minnesota winter, but survived too when I was doing the doctorate. And then came to the university, to Oklahoma State University in summer of 1981. I will say, just as a sidelight, if any students are interested in pursuing their master's or their doctorate, I did my master's in 1 year. I don't recommend that. I
Right.
did my doctorate in 2 years. Minnesota was on the quarter system. They mandated that you had to be there 9 quarters. I actually finished all my coursework in 8 quarters, had to stay the 9th quarter to meet the legal requirements that they had. But again, I don't recommend that. I moved too quickly through both the master's and the doctorate,
Yeah.
but did so for financial reasons.
Sure. Well, so when when you went back to get the doctorate, was your goal with that to go into the faculty, or was that more of just a personal or professional development tool?
Well, there's actually kind of a story to goes behind that. When I was at the University of Wyoming, uh, my major professor was a gentleman named John Schultz. Dr. John Schultz had gone from the University of Wyoming to the University of Minnesota. He contacted me while I was down in Texas. They had gotten a large research project to conduct research on the upper Mississippi River as a part of designation of federal properties. This was in and around the time period when the Wild Rivers Act was going into its full implementation, required evaluation of the resources. It was a part of an era when there was a major step forward in environmental concern. If you think, for example, the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970 had just gone into effect. So it was in that time frame that federal agencies were reviewing their properties for a variety of purposes. So my job, offered through John Schultz at the University of Minnesota during that 2 year period, was to do an assessment of properties along the upper Mississippi. Uh, Much of it is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, some is National Park Service, some is other agencies of federal government. But reviewing those properties for federal designation, potentially as wilderness, potentially as national recreation areas, and so on. So I had from Minneapolis to Alton, Illinois, the area that is that there's a series of impoundments, locks and dams on the upper Mississippi. Number one is in Alton, Illinois. And from Alton, Illinois, south, the river is a free-flowing river. But these upper areas are a series of impounded, if you call them lakes, but they're locks and dams. And that was the stretch that I had responsibility for. So even though I'm working on my doctorate, this was my job, and got to travel a lot and get very, very familiar with the river corridor. As it turned out, a number of the recommendations that we had were implemented. The area was not designated wilderness for a variety of reasons, primarily purity of the wilderness concept, but much of the area has been designated with various recreational classification, and it's a beautiful recreational haven for people who like hunting, fishing, bird watching, boating, so on.
And then you finish your doctorate and you're exploring different options after that. What I get, if you think back about that time, what were your ideas professionally as to where you wanted to go, what you wanted to do?
My wife being from Texas, her preference would have been for us to find a job in Texas.
Yeah.
I personally would not have wanted to stay in the, I'm going to call them the union states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, very strong teacher unions. And I had developed a dislike for the union structure that I dealt with while in Minnesota. But I had applied for jobs, number of locations, as is common for a student coming out with a doctorate. Ended up not being on a quarter system. The quarter system at Minnesota did not fit very well with semester systems that were going on in most other colleges and universities. And then in my case, I had one quarter that was just dead time. These are days before cell phones and so on. So it was difficult for me to be available for contact to potential calls for jobs. We had to sell our home in Minnesota. I didn't have immediate landline service, and I'm on the road doing a lot of work on the river, and it was very difficult. But I got a call from a lady here at Oklahoma State University, Pauline Winter, said they'd love to have me come in for an interview. I came in for that interview, and the very same week that I came to Oklahoma State University for an interview, I got contacted from University of North Texas, Eastern Washington. I don't remember all the places, but I came to Oklahoma State University, and my plan was to be here for a few years and then move on. Well, it turned into 30 plus years. I really enjoyed the opportunity to build and to change a program. When I came to Oklahoma State University, there were 3 faculty members. The program was largely oriented toward what I would call a sport flavor. My job was to build more of the outdoor component. Oklahoma State University manages a lake. There's some great opportunities in the area. And we had a camp. We had lots of things going on that would have been good for an outdoor program. And that was my job, to build that outdoor side. So over the next several years, we were able to build a very loyal cadre of faculty and developed a program. At the time, national accreditation through the National Recreation and Park Association was also just taking off. So I had done my dissertation on accreditation, and Oklahoma State University wanted to become accredited, so I was brought in kind of as that authority to get us up to speed. And we achieved that in 1987. Became an accredited program. Uh, and honestly, from that point forward, this program flourished. You as one of the products a few years down the road, know very well what the baccalaureate program is like and what the doctoral program is like, as well as having a sense of the master's. But we built the program in terms of quality, numbers, but it was also a time period when there was a major change in the academy. When I first came to Oklahoma State University, the common teaching load for a faculty member was 4-4. 4 courses every spring, 4 courses every fall. There was not really an expectation for publication, research, um, presentation, grant opportunities. But over, I would say, the first 15 years of my time here, uh, by the mid 1990s, the university had changed, but the program had changed. And I was very active in the grant world. And in my 31 years as a faculty member, I never missed a summer paycheck. The summer pay was always on grant money.
Yeah.
Uh, when I first arrived here, faculty went on a 10-month academic pay, and then their 2 months was do whatever you can, or
Yeah.
get 1 month for summer pay if you teach a class. Well, I chose not to do that. I chose to do grants. Eventually, the university changed from a 10-month to a 9-month pay, leaving 3 months in the summer. A lot of faculty grumbled over that. I found it to be stimulating. And what it takes is the development of connections. So in my case, I chose to build connections with 2 agencies. One was at the federal level, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, their regional office in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Um, we have a lot of lakes in the state. All of them have research opportunities. And I was fortunate to be able to build relationships and conduct a lot of research for the Army Corps of Engineers. The other was the Oklahoma State Parks Division. In our state, it's part of the Tourism and Recreation Department. So that has a tourism component. I work primarily with the state park side. And over the years, almost every year, we've had one or more projects. At this point, I look back and we've had over $9 million in grants and contracts that have allowed me to mentor students, you being one of those, but I couldn't tell you how many others like yourself um, were on various projects. All of these projects had products, usually a research report, but they would develop dissertations, they would develop theses, they would develop into a variety of presentations, all of which I believe have added to the scholarship in our field. And to me, that's what a university and a college professorial career is all about.
You kind of mentioned of the long list of names, right? And I remember when I was going through my PhD, um, at some point I'd gotten your CV to do something with it. I remember looking at the names and just being, in all honesty, just kind of floored. Like the number and the folks the names I recognized that I didn't realize had stemmed from the Dr. Lowell Caneday tree, so to speak. So I think,
It is, yeah, that's an interesting tale in and of itself. There's a gentleman who also happened to be a University of Minnesota doctoral grad, Dan Dustin, who
mhm.
has done some tracing of the various doctoral trees. And it is interesting to think about who learn from whom and how are these people connected in our field. And yes, I have had the wonderful opportunity to work with some brilliant young minds, but I look back, uh, John Schultz was my immediate advisor, but I worked with people like Leo McAvoy. Leo McAvoy at the University of Minnesota, very, very well-known author and philosopher, an associate of Dan Dustin, who preceded me. Carla Henderson, a prolific writer. Uh, Deb Bialeski, uh, individuals who all came through that University of Minnesota system, but they would have been other branches off of that same tree.
And it was also when I started doing some of these interviews, the folks that um, we talk off video or whatnot. And, oh yeah, I met Dr. Kennedy at this or that conference, and um, it's been. So I'll say I'm very thankful to have had you as a mentor, advisor, and somebody I can still connect to. Whether you like it or not, I still consider you a mentor. um,
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And yes, actually, from my perspective, I look around the country and I think there are some bright young minds that I have the opportunity to influence. And they have, in and of themselves, developed uh, careers, reputations of quality. And that's the most satisfying part. Yeah,
what
you're one of
so
them.
why? Thank you. It's I look back at my time, both undergrad and I know during our undergrad time, the building was under renovation for a part of that, and so it was a unique time. But even my undergrad, having the people, Dr. Deb Jordan, Jerry Jordan, Colleen Hood, Susie Lane, who has now passed, but those are some unique people that I felt like I was at the right place at the right time to have an incredible set of folks around me during my development as undergrad. And I think that's was very instrumental in my life and my career. Um,
I don't know that students always get the sense of what I would call collegiality. Uh, we understand the word college, but to be a colleague in a collegial environment, uh, you mentioned a couple of names, Jerry Jordan. Pauline Winter was the coordinator of the program when I arrived. We brought in a woman from Temple University named Chris Cashel, uh, and then myself. There were the four that really built the program here at Oklahoma State University, and we remain truly collegial and a strong department for a period of about a decade. And then individuals would get drawn into other areas. You commented a bit ago about an interest in university administration. I ended up being department head and then associate dean for a number of years, worked a lot with the graduate college. And every time a person moves up, you think, do we add another faculty line? But those were the opportunities when we would bring in people like Dr. Deb Jordan, a prolific author in and of her own right, but she then came in as another member of our team. Our program grew in the therapeutic area, and that's when we were able to bring in Susie Lane, Colleen Hood, to develop a very strong program in the therapeutic recreation world. But over the years, the collegial nature of faculty is remarkable. I'm not sure that all of that has been retained here at Oklahoma State. The university has changed around the program, but the program has also changed. Much of what I ended up doing has now been subsumed into the Department of Geography.
Mm-hmm.
They no longer do some of the things dealing with the outdoor. Part of it may be a reflection of technology. I commented earlier about computers when I was in the baccalaureate program. But by the time we got into the early 1990s, there was a move toward computerized mapping, whether it be remote sensing, as it used to be called, or GIS, GPS work, all of those sorts of things came online. Well, we have done a lot of research in the technologically based areas for our parks. That is more academically aligned with geography than it is with traditional parks and recreation. And those things happen within the profession, within the college or university setting. But I don't regret it. It's been an interesting career. I would say if students think in terms of what happens in their lives, just remember you are going to learn more post-degree in your careers than you ever thought possible in a 4-year period in a college or university. Much of what I ended up using in my academic and professional career was not even in existence at the time that I was a student. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have portable computers. We didn't have the things that we routinely think of today
Right.
as being tools. Who knows what the next generation is going to deal with? But you have to learn how to use those tools.
Well, something that you mentioned when you were talking about your youth is I was talking to some students last semester and talked about not having cable television or satellite television or anything like that. We had bunny ears, and we, because I grew up in Northeast Texas, we got one or two channels out of the Dallas area, and sometimes we could pick something out of Louisiana. And they were like, "Well, you just didn't have the money to buy." I was like, "Well, I mean, number one, we didn't have the money to buy satellite, but it didn't exist. There was no
It didn't exist.
satellite TV." And it blew their minds, right? They were just like, they couldn't fathom that. And which is the same kind of way, like you talked about not having running water in your home. I'm like, I think that's on the same plane a little bit. I'm like, I cannot fathom that. But so something I always think is interesting is, and I ask this of everybody, if you didn't end up being a professor with your long career there, and money was not an object, so to speak, what would be your dream job, and what would you be doing?
If I had not gone the academic route, and I actually have considered this over the years, I would probably have ended up working for either a state or federal land management agency. I did work 6 years with Minnesota State Parks, and I loved those years. Now, in most cases, the positions I held were seasonal, clearly an emphasis upon spring, summer, early fall. Many of the parks up there closed down during the winters. But I've taken on other opportunities with Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Forest Service along the way. And I've always thought, if I had done something different, wouldn't it have been great to have had your uh, professional career in a national park or in a remote wilderness area? Uh, and could have enjoyed it. Actually, my wife and we have at various times talked about becoming summer volunteers. There's a desperate need for support personnel, primarily in an interest area that I would have would be interpretive services. Um, that in our retirement years, we would buy a travel trailer and work and live in a park during the summer. There are a lot of individuals who do it. There's various organizations who coordinate that sort of volunteer work. Um, as it's happened, I've chosen to remain involved with the parks in a different manner, but I can see it happening.
I was going to say, you still have time, right?
We hope. Yeah, we hope.
Well, Dr. Caneday, before I let you go, as is typical Caneday style, you've sprinkled in different bits of wisdom. But is there any if you could give somebody who's a future professional, a young professional, a student, and they're thinking about their life, their career, their education in the parks, recreation, sports, tourism, leisure, all those words in that world. Is there any specific or tidbits of advice that you would offer them?
You can identify with this first one I'm going to give. I encourage students to read the classic literature in our field. Unfortunately, I think we've gotten away from a lot of the reading. But for us, I'd quickly say, okay, here's the list. You've got to read San County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. You have to become familiar with John Muir. You have to be, and I can just go down the list. But read the literature that shaped our history as a nation, as a people, how we have connected with the land, natural resources, and why that connection between humans and nature is important. So I encourage reading. You have my reading list. I dare say you've added to it. And keep encouraging students to read. The second is get experience.
Yeah.
Take opportunities to get out there and work. The kinds of things I've done from spraying 2,4-D or 2,4,5-T on gooseberry bushes to digging angleworms to you name it. The things that we have done as part of jobs, get experience. You will not regret how things weave together. In the academic area, I strongly encourage building a solid foundation in the literature, the science areas. Students need that background. And today, you have to have the skills in the computer area. It's just crucial. But kind of overriding that, it's building the connections. Be a friend and build the connections with people, because it's all in the long run, it's the connections you have with people that make doors open. So be a good colleague, be a good friend. Life has a lot to offer.
I think a lot of that kind of wrapped up in a good citizen, right?
Be a good citizen.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
No doubt
Dr.
about it.
Kennedy, thank you so much again for sharing your time with me this morning. I'm glad that I asked you and appreciate you agreeing to let me interview
Glad to
this
do
morning.
it.
I
At
know
this
that.
point, 70 years, how do you condense it into?
Right. Well, and that's what I thought too, is because some of these have kind of gone longer, which is fine. Some people are a little bit, chattier, I guess you'd say. But I was thinking the same thing too. But I think, you kind of led us along your path pretty well there. And I'm sure there's many more stories that, so if somebody sees you, there in Stillwater or at a conference, they can ask you more because I know, personally, I know there's more stories behind a lot of those experiences.
I
So
hear that a lot of the stories get retold.
yeah, but it's I was talking. You may remember this name, Josh Pulver.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
I was talking to Josh Pulver, and he asked if I had talked to you recently, and I said actually, I'm going to be talking to him Friday morning, and it was one of those things that even Josh is taking a different path, career wise, and he just is like, man, that guy's just incredible, and and I think you did have a variety of experiences to draw from, so I think that's the biggest part, and I think that's the best advice you can give is, like you said, is to get people to get out there and try new things, get new experiences, and meet new people.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
well, I know that you and your wife have some gardening to do. Um, so I don't want to take any more time. I'll let you go. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good
Greatly
day. Tell
appreciate it.
Diane I said hello.
I'll pass that on.
Okay.